Hey guys, so today's lesson is going to be a mix of what we've learned the last 2 weeks. One being the zero product property, where if two things multiply to give you 0, then one of those factors equals 0. So either A equals 0, B equals 0. And we're going to be talking about factoring today as well. So we're going to put both lessons in together to solve a problem like this. So if I said solve this problem, you might think, okay, well, to solve this, sorry, I'm trying to get used to this, I would have to subtract 12 from both sides, and I would get x squared minus 8x equals negative 12. You're trying to get x by itself, right? Well, what's the problem with this x and this x? Can these be combined? No, because they're different like terms. And if you add 8x here, try to move them over here, you try to move things around and manipulate it so that you get x by itself, you're going to realize that these can't be combined because he doesn't have an x. So you're just going to be moving things around the whole time. And that's not what we want. We want to get x by itself. And now we have x on both sides, which is not what we want. So to do this, you need to use the zero product property, because we know that if the whole thing, the computer's going slow. We know that if two things multiply to give me 0, then we can set the factors equal to 0. But the problem with this problem is that this is x squared minus 8x plus 12. This is not a multiplication problem. And we need it in order to be the zero product property. We need it to be a multiplication problem right there in the middle. So we have to turn this into a multiplication problem. And to do that, we factor. Remember, factoring is turning something into a multiplication problem. So we've got to turn this into something times something else. So we're turning this part, the underlined part, no, you see this, we're turning this into something being multiplied. Remember, and to do that, you factor. Remember, from last week, the two things that go here have to multiply to give me x squared. So what two things multiply to give me x squared? Well, x times x. X times x is x squared. And then the two numbers that go here have to multiply to give me 12 and add to give me the middle term, which is negative 8. So let's figure out first 12. What multiplies to give me 12? Well, we got 1 times 12, 2 times 6, 3 times 4, and that's it. Those are the only factors of 12. So out of these, which ones add, or since we have a negative here, subtracts to give me 8? Well, 2 and 6 do, right? But 2 plus 6 is 8, and we need negative 8. So we're going to use this guy. We're going to use the numbers 2 and 8, but we need to figure out what signs they're going to be. Is it going to be positive 2 and positive 6, or negative and a positive? Which one's it going to be? So let's think about this. We need it to be negative 8. And for this to add up to be negative 8, we need it to be negative 2 plus negative 6. And that adds up to be 8. Negative 8. What am I doing? But here, 2 times 6 gives me 12, and we're saying they're both negative. Do two negatives still give me positive 12? Yes. So it's going to be minus 2 and minus 6. So I feel like I did that a little confusing. So let's just go over that real quick. Negative 2 times negative 6 is 12, and negative 2 plus negative 6 is negative 8. And that gives you the middle term. Remember, to check your work, you can distribute out and see if you got the right answer. But this time, we're not going to distribute out and check if it matches. We're going to continue to solve. So now we are going to use, so now we turn this into a multiplication problem. And now we can use the zero product property. If we have two things, this times this equals 0, then one of them is 0. So same thing. We have this whole thing, x minus 2, times x minus 6 equals 0. So using the zero product property, one of them has to be 0. So either x minus 2 equals 0 or x minus 6 equals 0. And that's because the whole thing equals 0. So what we did was turn this into this. We turned it into a multiplication problem. And now that it's a multiplication problem, we can set the factors equal to 0. We add 2 to both sides and get x equals 2. That's one of my answers. And then to solve for x here, we're going to add 6 to both sides and get x equals 6. So you have two answers here now. We're actually solving for x. The answer is x equals 2 and x equals 6. Let's try another one. So now we're going to solve this guy. Now the whole thing, this whole thing equals 0. Now we can't say, oh, he must equal 0, he must equal 0, and he must equal 0, because the signs in between are adding and subtracting, and they're supposed to be multiplication. So how do you turn something into a multiplication problem? You factor. So we're going to factor this. So let's go back to here. We're going to factor. So we're going to turn this into a multiplication problem by factoring, which is what we worked on all last week. So what two numbers multiply, numbers or letters, what two things multiply that go here and here that will give me x squared? Well, x times x is x squared. And then they have to, these two numbers that go here have to multiply to give me 21, negative 21, but add to give me 4. So let's try this. What multiplies? Let's just worry about 21, not even the negative yet. Multiplies to give me 21. 1 times 21. 2 doesn't go into 21. 3 does. 3 times 7. And that's it. These are the only ones that multiply to give me 21. Now, it's negative. So that means one of these have to be negative. Either negative 1 times 21 or 1 times negative 21. Same thing here. It's either negative 3 times 7 or 3 times negative 7. But one of them has to be negative. So out of all these, which one are going to add to give me 4? Well, this doesn't. This doesn't. Now these, depending on, well, not depending. Which one of these, this one's can get a little tricky. Which one of these adds to give me 4? Now, negative 3 plus 7, if I'm using this guy, he equals 4. This guy, negative 3, not negative, 3 plus negative 7 equals negative 4. So we don't want the negative because this is positive. So we're going to have to use these two numbers. So we're going to have negative 3 and positive 7. Those are the two numbers that go there because x times x is x squared. Negative 3 times 7 gives me negative 21. And negative 3 plus 7 gives me the 4. So if you distribute this out, you'll get this. But now we know this times this equals 0. So using the zero product property, either x minus 3 equals 0. It's so sloppy, I'm so sorry. Or x plus 7 equals 0. So now we solve each one. For solving for x here, we're going to get rid of the 3 by adding 3. We get x equals 3. If we're solving for x here, we've got plus 7, so we're going to get rid of 7 by subtracting 7 to both sides. And we get x equals negative 7. And that's my answer. I'm going to do one more example. And it's a little different. It's when this doesn't equal 0. Now, because it's a square and we have this w and this w, these can't be combined. So we know we're going to probably want to get it equal to 0 and set the factors equal to 0 using the zero product property. But to do that, the zero product property tells us that it has to equal 0. Does ours equal 0 here? No. So we need to get it to be equal to 0. So how can we turn negative 3 into 0? Well, if we add 3 to both sides, what's going to happen here is that, I'll bring down the equal sign now, negative 3 plus 3, that turns to 0. And that's what we want. So you always just do the opposite, move it to the other side to get it to be 0. Move everything on this side over there to get it to be 0. And then we're going to simplify this. W squared minus 4w plus 3. None of these terms, all three of them, none of them can be combined. They're all different. They're not like terms. So we can just bring everything down. I bring him down. I bring the negative 4w down and the plus 3. And now we factor. We're going to turn this into a multiplication problem. It's minus and a plus sign. So we want to turn it into a multiplication problem. So we're going to be something times something else equals 0. We're going to turn him into a multiplication problem. And to do that, the first two terms that go here and here have to multiply to give me w squared. What two things multiply to give me w squared? Well, w times w. And then the two things that go here, the two numbers, they have to multiply to give me 3 and add to give me -4. So the only thing that multiplies to give me 3 is 1 times 3. But we need it to be add up to be -4. Well, 1 plus 3 is 4, but it's not negative. So to make this work, we can make them both negative. Because -1 times -3 is still +3, because two negatives make it positive. But -1 plus -3 gives us the -4, which is what we want for the middle. So the numbers here are going to be -1 and -3. So now that we've got w minus 1 times w minus 3, now that we got this times this equals 0, we can use the zero product property and set the factors equal to 0. And then we're going to solve. So we're solving for w, so we're going to add 1. The minus 1 is in the way, so we do the opposite. We get w equals 1. And then here we're going to add 3, we're going to get w equals 3. So those are my two answers. So real quick, you need to make sure, if I go back on this, you need to make sure that 0 is set to one side. You need to make sure 0 is on one side. Then you need to factor the middle or turn it into a multiplication problem. And then you set the factors equal to 0.